Ready? I don't think we have. Do we have Skyping available? Bola, do we know, or Shelley? Alderman Kramer's calling in. He's calling in.
There. It's mandatory too. That's always one.
Periodically. Yeah. Actually, the third one. No.
I feel like I have a drawer full of these.
I know. This is my third one.
Really?
Yeah.
You should only really.
Centennial. I don't think so. Do you have one that says
How
Centennial?
come you have three?
I don't know. I have two that are gold and one that is silver.
We can start. We can start.
Okay, thank you. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the August 7th, 2019 Special Board of Aldermen meeting. Everyone, please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Alderman Kramer. I'm getting here. Alderman Leahy.
Here.
Alderman Lockmiller.
Here.
Alderwoman Parker Tice.
Here.
Alderman Plufka.
Here.
Alderwoman Sims.
Here.
Alderwoman O'Neill. And Alderman Weggie.
Here.
Okay, the chair would ask for a motion to change the agenda just a little bit to accommodate the requests of some of our guests tonight. What I'd like to do is move what is listed as board discussion item 5, which really is resolution number 1163, up to item number 3.
Second.
All right. Everyone in favor of making that change, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Okay. So what we have on the agenda then, Brentwood Bound Project established the 2019 certificates of participation. When I had requested to call this special meeting, it was simply to take up this idea, the need to address the medicinal marijuana. But we also decided to add this to the agenda. And we have in attendance tonight some of our Brentwood Bound consultants who are in a position to give a quick little presentation, kind of touch on what they discussed at the June special session. And then we have some others in attendance if there are any questions. As this board knows, the CLOMER, we have that now, the conditional letter of map revision. And I just want to share with the board, I think we should give thanks to Congresswoman Ann Wagner. I think that she played a very important role in getting this CLOMER when we did. I met with somebody from her office back in May and went over with him the entire Brentwood bound project. And he was very impressed, not just with the scope of the project, but the fact that the city was taking it all on themselves. And we were shouldering 100% of the cost of this thing. And he was so impressed that Congresswoman Wagner then wanted to meet with the mayor. She actually came to City Hall last Wednesday. She allotted 30 minutes. She gave us about 60 minutes. And at the end of it, she said if there's anything she could do to help, let her know. Monday morning, as I was walking into a meeting with somebody from Senator Hawley's office, at my office at 7:30, I placed a call to Congresswoman Wagner. That was at 7:30 in the morning. 10:30 in the morning, I get a call back from her office telling us that the CLOMAR had been signed and it had been put in the mail. Later in that day, I received another call from her office saying that they were going to have that emailed to City Hall on Monday to speed the process up because they knew we needed it for tonight. And we did. We got it on Monday. So I want to publicly acknowledge the efforts of Congresswoman Wagner and thank her office in helping us speeding that, the signing of the CLOMAR. So first up, we're going to hear from Phil Blon. He's going to give us just a quick little recap of the CLOMAR and compare that to what was applied for back in January. Phil, you want to come on up?
Thank you. And first, I just have a little bit more on the timeline. As you may remember, we submitted the application on January 17th. I said that this would take 3 to 6 months. It ended up being a little bit longer than 6. So I'm not surprised it was on the longer end of that. But we had an initial response from FEMA on April 11th. We submitted our reply to those comments 3 weeks later, and then the CLOMAR was issued. It's dated Friday last week, but it was emailed to the city, and I was copied on it Monday morning, as the mayor said. So just to recap what this is, as FEMA defined it, there's the last bullet on this slide here. The CLOMAR is FEMA's comment that it agrees that the project, if constructed, would result in the map change that we proposed within the application. So this gives you, it's designed to give you some, ensure that some comfortable, that you're comfortable going forward with a large construction project. You want to have some assurance that it will achieve what you're setting out to do.
And again, it's approximately 30 to 31 acres that's being removed out of the 100-year flood plain, I believe.
Right.
And that hasn't changed. There we go. We have it up on the screens.
Yeah. This is roughly the same purple shape that we presented in January. The exact shape did change a little bit with some of the revisions, but not enough for any of the areas to be affected. This slide is still valid. This is what I presented back in January 2019. The 60 acres is, well, the existing floodplain is 60 acres within the project area. The proposed floodplain is 29 acres, and the area available for redevelopment south of Manchester Road is 38 acres. That plus the proposed floodplain total more than 60 because some of the area for redevelopment is outside the existing floodplain.
So again, the CLOMAR is simply a confirmation from FEMA that if we build it as detailed, as planned, then it will result in the 30-some acres being pulled out of the 100-year floodplain. Have any questions for Phil on that? Alderman Plufka.
Can you tell us where, so you said that if it's 29 and 38, obviously that's more than 60.
Right.
The additional acreage is located where? On the north side of Manchester?
No, there's some areas on the south side of Manchester that are outside the floodplain now.
Okay.
So
You mean immediately adjacent to the road, or where?
yeah, but kind of towards the east. So if you look, the properties, I think it's that strip mall that includes a number of businesses. The
Okay.
I can't remember
It's
what's
the area that's not
adjacent
even
to that.
shaded. It's the
Yeah,
area that's not
yeah.
shaded, just south of Manchester Road.
Exactly. So that's at least 8 or 9 acres that would be available for redevelopment, but is in addition to the 29.
And the purple shaded area is the area that will remain in the floodplain, and the other shaded area is the area that's being pulled out of the floodplain as a result of the work we're doing.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, any other questions for Phil? Okay, thanks, Phil. Next up, we're going to have just a quick little presentation by Andy, struck off from PGAV, and that was simply to talk about the proposed, or the expected revenue to be generated by the economic development sales tax. It was shared with the board that that number has come in at about $3.27 million. That's the expectation. Andy, when you get a chance.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. My name is Andy Struckhoff with PGAV. So we did a revenue projection analysis for the economic development sales tax. This table shows growth in taxable sales in the city of Brentwood from 2014 to 2018. On an average annual basis, it's been 1.7% in growth. We ran 3 different scenarios. We looked at first scenario, what if nothing else changes significantly in Brentwood? Taxable sales remain kind of as they are, but grow naturally 1% on an average annual basis through 2030 and then remain level. Okay, thank you, sorry. So that would result in roughly $3.2 million in taxable sales, and tax revenue for the economic development sales tax in 2020, growing to approximately $3.6 million in 2030. The second case we looked at, according to the redevelopment program for the flood mitigation program, certain property along the corridor would be acquired, and certain of that property generates sales tax revenue. So if we lost some of that property and lost some of that sales tax revenue, what's the impact of that kind of an action? So we looked at that. And that would result in an impact of, roughly a similar $3.2 million in tax revenue in 2020, and then in 2030, roughly $3.47 million in sales tax revenue. But there's also a plan to develop additional property, additional sales tax generating property along the corridor. So what would happen if that happened? Then we'd be adding sales tax, taxable sales and sales tax revenue to the city of Brentwood, in which case sales tax revenue may grow from $3.2 million in 2020 to approximately $3.7 million in 2030. This table just summarizes the 3 cases we looked at. And so baseline scenario, with roughly $3.2 million in sales tax revenue, with conditions as they are now, if there's natural growth, could grow to $3.6 million by 2030. If we lost some sales tax generating businesses and didn't replace them, then sales taxes could grow to $3.4 million in 2030. If we replace those with other things, then we would grow sales tax revenue to $3.7 million by 2030.
Any questions?
Andy, when you give me these crazy numbers,
Yeah.
what businesses and what types of businesses are you saying are going in here? I assume you're doing a very conservative average.
Correct. We're estimating average sales per square foot at $200
Per square foot of building.
Right. For anything that would be added. So that would account for including things like a dry cleaner or a hair salon that doesn't generate much in sales tax revenue. Also includes, you may have a neighborhood grocery store or some other such thing, or a restaurant along the corridor as well. So we think that $200 per square foot on average over the overall is pretty conservative.
Thank you.
Alderman Plufka.
Thank you. So going to table 1, that's an estimate. I'm assuming that you just extrapolated out the growth from 14 to 18 and then extrapolated that out?
Correct.
So how does 1.7% increase over 4 years translate to a 1% a year increase?
Well, it's 1% on an average annual basis.
Okay.
actual growth may fluctuate over time into the future. and I
It
suspect
has
it
over the
will.
last 4 years.
It has, that's true, that's true. I didn't want to carry forward in a straight line the 1.7% growth. I felt that may be a little bit too aggressive, but I felt that carrying forward an average annual 1% growth is conservative and with respect to what's happened over the past 5 years. Over the past 10 years, since 2008, taxable sales have grown on an average annual basis 3.7%. So growth is slowing a bit. So that's why we kind of took the approach to be conservative with respect to the past 5-year trend and then leveling off after 10 years, not showing any growth after 2030.
So even though the actual experience over the last 4 years, 5 years, I guess, was 1.7% increase, you factored into that first table a more aggressive growth than what's been experienced over the last 4 years,
More conservative.
more conservative.
So over from
If you're 1.7 over the 5 years and it takes you 5 years to get there, how is 1% per year more conservative?
from 2014 to 2018, 1.7% growth was on an average annual basis. So it was 1.7% each year, 2014 through 2018.
I just figured out my mistake. So math's not my strong suit. Thank you very much. I understand now.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions, Alderman Plufka?
Uh-uh. No, that's enough. I've messed around with this long enough.
Alderman Leahy?
Yes, sir.
Andy, in your calculations, do you factor in any effect that internet sales would have on this area as to your $200 a square foot profit margin?
Well, A, it's not a profit margin, it's gross sales.
I'm sorry, say it, okay.
Okay, and B, when we're doing any sales estimates these days, we're being a little bit more conservative than we may have been in the past. 5, 10 years ago, we may have been looking at $250 or $300 a square foot, but we've backed off that quite a bit to account for internet sales. So that's
Thank you.
certainly taken a bite.
Okay. Anything else? Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
Jim, if you don't mind, come on down, because I know there's been a few questions that have been raised that hopefully you can answer.
Sure. Good evening, everybody.
Everybody knows Jim Leahy, I'm assuming. And what Jim has done, he's put together a projection for 40, in essence, bonding out $40 million. And the way that came up was quite simple. The project since January has been budgeted to be about $79 million. We got $39 million last year. Difference is $40 million. And that would finish the project that we had planned on in January of this year. That is, again, the three components: the flood mitigation, the Manchester Road improvements, and the connector to the GRG. And in order to do all those, you have the slides. We went over those in June. The slides show what is and is not included in that $79 million. But I know Alderman Leahy had some questions, so I'm going to turn it over, Alderman Leahy, to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim, my question is on the cost of money.
Okay.
You're going to charge us a fee to do, let's assume we start at the $40 million figure.
Yes, sir.
If I raise that to the $45 or $50 million figure, what does that do to your cost of generating the papers to do the bonding? The second part of the question is, if I delay, do the 40 million now and come back in 5 years and say I need another 10 or 15 million, what is it going to cost me to generate your paperwork to do the bonding for that?
Okay. First of all, just so everybody understands, when you issue certificates or issue bonds, there is a cost, as Alderman Leahy is referring to. There's a difference between what we refer to as the par amount, the amount that's actually sold to the public, and the net proceeds, what you need for your project, okay? A little bit awkward with this particular situation. It has nothing to do with fees. It's got to do with how these certificates are sold. So I want to, because when I explain the cost, you're gonna have a hard time adding it. It's not gonna make sense when you add it up. So let me just try to explain it. So when we sell bonds or certificates are in $5,000 increments, okay? And typically, if you bought them at par, somebody would pay $5,000 to buy a $5,000 bond, right? Easy to understand. When you have rated securities like these will be, thank you. There we go. That better? By the way, the certificates in 2018 were AA minus rated, okay? And we would expect the same rating this time. So that's an attractive security. So somebody, a purchaser, typically would pay a premium to buy those certificates. So instead of paying $5,000, or let's make it simple, $1 for every dollar they're buying, they would rather than just pay $1, they would pay $1.05 or $1.10. Okay, and in some cases, we're estimating that with these certificates that we're talking about here this evening, that it would range anywhere in any particular maturity. They would pay anywhere from $1.01 for every dollar of certificates they would buy. In some cases, they would pay up to $1.13. So what that means is, the reason I'm mentioning it, I want everybody to understand, I think it's important, because you're going to do the math. I would expect you to. You're going to think, we're going to issue this much certificates, and that leaves us this much money when we subtract out the cost you're asking me about, right? Those premiums, we're estimating, will add up to about a little over 3.1 million. So the amount of certificates that we would actually sell, I'm looking at it, would be, in our estimate right now, 40,570,000. Okay? 40,570,000, if somebody was to keep track of this. I'm going to round some of these numbers rather than use the precise, because somebody have sense here. But so we'd have premium of 3,158,000. Okay? That adds up to, again, I'm rounding, 43.7 million in sources of money. What are we going to do with it? I think this is what you're asking me. What are we going to do with it? And I'll try to itemize it out as much as I can, okay, to give you that same number so we can add up to the, okay. So in this example, we got $40,400,000, I think the mayor indicated, for project cost, okay? We've got a debt service reserve. Most of you who have been around issues like this, you know that bond purchasers, certificate purchasers want to see a reserve. And the reason for that is because if there's an interruption somehow, some way, the monies aren't available when they're due for debt to pay debt service, they want to be confident that there's a cushion there. There's some extra money there that would be, it's called a reserve fund. In this case, we've estimated the reserve fund, again, I'm rounding, 2.6 million, okay? So that leaves, the balance then is about 730,000. And Alderman Leahy, that's what you're at. And I'll break it out, but I'll break it out. Stiefel's fee, the underwriting discount, what we refer to it, is a percentage. It's 1.25%, okay, of the par amount. Or I'll give you the number, 500,000. It's actually 507,000, but I'm rounding, okay? 507,000. The balance of about 225,000 are legal fees, their trustee fees, their to draft documents, Gilmore and Bell drafts documents, bond documents, an offering document, and so those things, 500,000, 225,000, 2.6 million, 40,400,000 should add up to the same number I gave you before. Sorry for that long explanation. I wanted to add that premium in there because you would have added it and you would have said, this doesn't add up. Okay, so I apologize if that's more detail than you wanted. So,
That's if I run the 40 million that we're looking at.
yes, sir.
If I push it to the 50 million bucket, what is that cost compared to, let's come back and do that if we need to 5, 6, 7 years down the road? Do I save myself money or am I costing myself money to put it into this bond at this time?
To do, I want to make sure.
Raising it.
To go back to the market somewhere down, is that what you're asking?
No.
Somewhere down the road, another issuance to
If we needed
generate
it.
10 million or 15 million, whatever the number would be, right? So here, two things I would ask you to consider. I would just, trying to help you if I was in your position. Number one, and you've heard me say this before, I'm kind of laughing at myself a little bit, is that we keep telling you, I keep coming to these meetings, John Klaus or myself, we keep coming to, said, market conditions right now are outstanding. You've heard us say that, right?
Yes, sir.
we're here saying it again, okay? I don't know what they're gonna be, Alderman Leahy, in 3 years or 5 years. They could be better. They really could. They could be worse. The industry, keeps thinking it's a matter of time before they go up. I mean, we've been at an historical low on these interest rates for quite some time now. So one of the concerns that I would have is if you wait, the interest rates might be higher, so the cost would be higher. Okay, they could be lower. I just said that, so they could be. The other thing is if you do multiple issuances, even though it's not Stifel's fee, because ours is a percentage of what it is. So our fee, we're the one that's really not impacted. But the lawyers, and they can speak for themselves, I know Mark Spikerman's here, but I'll just explain to you. If they have to do multiple issues, they have to draft the documents again. So they get paid again. That's the way it works. Because we can't just use the old documents. We need new documents, current document, an offering document to sell the bonds. We need new bond documents, certificate documents. So there's those costs again. And those costs would be similar to what I showed you before because, yeah, because again, I'm not defending their fees at all. And they can do that if you want them to. But whether the issuance is for 15 million or 30 million, they're drafting the same documents. They have to go through the same process to do what they do. And so their cost might be a little bit lower. I'm guessing they would be very similar to what we have here. Hope that answers your question.
You're in my ballgame.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ron.
Alderman Lockmiller.
Jim, we've been using this 2.6 annual debt service million.
Yes, sir.
Equates to this 40 million.
Yes, sir.
For a while now, and with global yields dropping like they are, could it possibly be lower by the time?
It could be. I mean, our job on behalf of you is to get the lowest interest rate we can, right? And that's what we do. And we take a lot of pride in doing that. So do I think we're being conservative? I don't know. Let me just tell you, just think of yourself. I'm not trying to turn the tables, but I just want you to think of it this way. So imagine if you bought a 1-year certificate. We're estimating a yield for a 1-year is 1.62%. That's low. I mean, I'm going to tell you, that's low. If you bought the 43 maturity, that's the longest one, okay, so the one that went out, the yield was 3.08. These are low rates. So at some point in time, it's a good question you're asking. It really is, and I understand why you'd be asking it, but I don't know how much lower than we'd be than what we're showing here. We might be, and as I said just a minute ago, our job is to get the lowest rate we can for you. That's our job. So, and we do that. How do we do that? We create competition. So I'd like to think if we have we're trying to sell 40,570,000. That's the number I told you before. I'd like to think we'd end up with. I hope we end up with orders for 60 million or 70 million. What does that mean? I got too many orders. So what does that mean? I can lower the rates, right? Because if all of you were buying these certificates and Alderman Lay says, oh, if you lower the rate, I'm out, well, I've got the rest of you to buy the certificates, right? That's the way it works. It's just supply and demand, and we're creating competition. So I'd like to think we could get lower rates, but I think what we're showing here is what we see in the market right now.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Jim? Okay, so just by way of, to sum this up, Jim, in June at the workshop, I think you told the board to get us $40 million in these certificates of participation. Once that issued, it would, as Alderman Lockmiller had stated, it would cost the city about $2.6 million annually
Yes,
to
sir.
service that debt.
Yes.
In layman's terms.
Correct.
Okay, and we have no other questions, right? Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
So what we have in front of you tonight, members of the board, is a Resolution 1163, which simply authorizes the underwriter to proceed with the certificates of participation for $40 million. And here's the good news: is once we got the numbers from PGAV, which I asked BOLA to check with Gilmore and Bell, because that's generating $3.27 million a year. That's the projection. And if we go with the $40 million, the debt service on that is $2.6 million. The difference is about $670,000 every year that, if you want to call, a cushion or extra. And Gilmore and Bell confirmed that that money can be used to help pay the annual debt service for the 2018 COPs. And right now, that's $2.8 million. So when we look into the 2020 budget, the 2021 budget, BOLA and the other heads are not going to have to come up with $2.8 million. Really, it's $2.2 million, in a sense. You know, it's very fungible because we're pulling from the general fund, we're pulling from the capital fund to help pay, to come up with that $2.8 million. And so that's permissible for us to do that. It makes it easier for us for budgeting purposes from here on out. Alderman Plufka.
I have a question about what you just said. So
Yeah.
are we legally restricted or compelled to treat these two piles of debt differently? In
what
other words,
respect?
can the revenue from this economic development sales tax, which postdates the original certificates of participation, can that excess that you just described be used to service that first set of debt, or does it have to be only the debt that was incurred after the sales tax was?
No, I asked specifically, Mark Grimm, can we use that to pay that annual debt?
On the
two-
existing-
Of the 2018 COPs.
Right.
And he said, yes, we can do
Okay.
that.
All
And
right.
I think we have somebody from Gilmore and Bell here in attendance.
Bikerman is here.
18 cops are payable from any revenues of the city appropriated by the Board of Aldermen. So if you were to,
I guess what I was concerned about was that sort of the reverse of that. In other words, the money that comes in from sales tax revenue, because it's an economic development sales tax and we're not sharing it under the typical AB configurations with other communities, are we restricted on what we can use that money for, to the extent that it can only be used with regard to debt that was incurred after the, after when, and we first put the sales tax in there?
it is restricted, but it's not restricted to debt. It is restricted to the statutory economic development purposes.
So whether that's economic development based on debt we incurred in 2018 or debt we've incurred since, it doesn't matter.
Timing doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alderman
if I
Plufka.
can ask-
Mark, we have one more.
We're throwing big numbers around, and I want to put them both in the same bucket. We've got a 2018 $42 million borrow already. We're looking at doing another $40 million. We're talking about a debt service of 2.6 to 2.7 million each year coming out of the budget. That 2.6 million covers both of those bonds, debt, indebtedness, right?
No.
No, you're going to tell me that it actually is going to be 2 point something for the first debt and 2.6 for the second debt. So we have to come up with 5 point something out of our budget for each year for the city of Brentwood to cover the indebtedness to make this project work.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
2.6 million is for the 2019 cops only.
Only. Thank you.
And it's 2.8 million for the 2018 cops.
To work with. So 2.6, 2.8 gives me the 5.2 million.
Right.
That we have to make sure is in each and every budget for the next 20-something years to pay these both down.
That's correct.
So that's money that can't be used, that we won't be able to be buying fire trucks or ambulances or other things that we got to kind of pace ourselves, because $5 million every year has to go in for the already incurred debt.
Well, and again, the 3.2 million from the economic development sales tax
Yep.
can only be used for the Brentwood
For that
bound.
one, yes.
Right.
But
So-
you've got to generate that $5 million to cover your debts before you've got money to cover your services.
Alderman Tyke.
Could I ask a question? So if I could clarify, the 2.8 that you're talking about, isn't that all of the certificates of participation that we have over a number of years, not just the 2018 cops? Am I reading this wrong? I just want to make sure we're, that the 2.8 you're talking about is all the certificates of participation we have out there,
You mean currently?
Right.
Currently.
That is correct. It's not just.
not just the 2018
Right.
cops. It's
Yeah,
the-
what you see on page 18 of the budget.
Right.
Is correct.
It's correct, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
But it's, the point being, that it's 2.79, 2.79 every year that we have to come up with out of the regular budget
Right.
without any dedicated revenue source
Right.
to pay that.
Right.
The difference between that and these COPs is we do have a dedicated revenue source.
Right, and we can
that's
use
the
these,
economic development
and we can
sales
use
tax.
these COPs to pay the 2018 COPs.
We're not using the
I mean, the tax
COPs.
revenue, we can use the tax revenue from
That is correct. That is correct.
new tax to pay either the 19 or the 18
That is
COPs.
correct. The economic development sales tax revenue can be used to service, and we'll have more than enough to service both the 2019 and then what's left over, if the board chooses, or however we want to handle it, can be used then to help pay the 2000, the other COPs. Alderman Lockmuller.
Would I be able to ask a question to Karen Shaw, who's on the regular payroll?
Sure. Is Karen in attendance? Yeah. Yep, there she is.
Karen, when we issue the economic development sales tax, will we need to set up a fifth fund for that revenue and expenditures tied to it?
Not a fifth fund, a line item in the Stormwater and Parks and Rec Fund,
Okay.
a line item. Like right now, we have sales tax and even in the general fund, we have the municipal fire sales tax. That all comes from the county. We'll just put a different line item for the economic development tax, and when it comes in, that's where we would book it.
Okay. And the debt service and expenditures?
That's separated out too. We do that now with the different COPs that we have, 14, 17, 18, and then we do a 19.
Perfect, thank you.
Alderman Legge.
So the recommendation, and maybe I missed the closed meeting last time, but the recommendation from staff was to issue $45 million. And that was given in the workshop we had and then the special meeting. So how did we arrive at the 40 million?
The 40 million is, I don't know if you had access to look at the slides, but there's, the 45 million includes everything in what we'll call the Norm-West Park. The water feature,
So that included that 5 million that was not currently covered. That was for the dog park, the event space.
Water park, right.
Destination playground, water play, event lawn and building, dog park.
That's correct. That's
So the
correct.
45 million was going to include that?
The
That's why that was
45 million
recommended?
would include everything, well, let's get that correct. That doesn't pay for everything, because that whole area, what's not included in the 79 million is the walking trail that's south, as well as some other features in that park. And the budget for that is about 11.5, I think 11,500,000. The $5 million would go to help fund that portion. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so that's why that was the recommendation, to go to 45 million to cover those things not currently in the $79 million estimate.
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay? And again, remember, just in front of you is the resolution. The resolution simply authorizes, we're setting the limit for all intents and purposes at $40 million, or whatever the amount is in the resolution. This is what we were going to do back in the June workshop. If you remember, we were having the discussion. At that point, did we want to go with the 45? Did we want to go with the 40? And Alderwoman Tice made the motion to just pull that out of the recommendation or the resolution, which we did. So now we're at the point, since we have the Clomer, we'd like to go forward and get the amount set. So with that, any other questions? The board would entertain a motion.
Your Honor, I'll make a motion to perfect or approve Resolution 1163 to do a COP in the tune of $40,400,000.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion to approve resolution number 1163 by Alderman Leahy and a second by Alderman Lockmuller. Any other questions or discussion? Okay, let's do a roll call, Shelley.
Alderman Kramer? Alderman Leahy?
Yes.
Alderman Lockmiller?
Yes.
Alderwoman Parker Tice? Alderman Plufka?
Yes.
Alderwoman Sims?
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill? And Alderman Weggie?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Jim. All the consultants, you are free to go. Appreciate your willingness to serve. Next on the agenda is, I guess it would be, I don't know what item number it is. It's a public hearing. Case number 1916, a public hearing to consider regulations for marijuana dispensaries and other land uses associated with medicinal marijuana. We'll gavel in case number 1916 at 7:11. Lisa Kirkemeyer, you want to come on down and give the board some information, please?
I believe, as the entire board is aware, last November, Missouri voters went ahead and approved an amendment to the state constitution to legalize medical marijuana. And the main primary, I guess, objective of the legislation and different rules and regulations that the state applied was that so counties and cities could not strictly prohibit medical marijuana facilities in their limits. So with that, there were a few other parameters, I guess you could say, or guidelines in terms of how cities could regulate medical marijuana facilities in their city limits. And so what the staff and also land use attorney was operating under was that the state was going to start accepting applications for medical marijuana facilities on August 3rd, and that they were going to start issuing permits per the amendment by the end of this year. So at some point, I think it was around July, there were some other emergency rules that they imposed, and now what we have is somewhat of a first round application period for facilities that still begins accepting of applications August 3rd, and then that first window closes on August 17th. So we had already started working, staff and again the land use attorney Stephanie Carr, on the ordinance we wanted to bring forward to the Planning and Zoning Commission. It's an amendment to Chapter 400. So again, that means it needs to be reviewed by the P&Z and then gets forwarded to you all for passage of an ordinance. So because of that, we went ahead and I guess we could say probably put it in overdrive or fast drive, whatever you want to call it. So to give you just a real quick update then of where things stand, we had a draft ordinance we were working on in June for presentation to the Planning and Zoning Commission on July 10th at their regular meeting. So Ms. Carr and I decided that we would go ahead and put a draft ordinance together so we had a working document to start with and something to present to the P&Z on the 10th. So with that first review, there were some minor changes that the commission wanted addressed. And one of the main things that we provided to the P&Z Commission between July 10th and July 31st was this buffer map that was included as part of your packet. At the July 10th meeting, we just had separation requirements from existing churches, schools, and child daycare centers in Brentwood. And we asked PGAV for assistance with our existing facilities to just show where these buffers requirements would be drawn. And of course, the commission said it would make sense if we saw what the overlaying zoning layers would be on this map. So we provided that on July 31st. The purpose of all this was, as I had mentioned earlier, the state did give the cities and counties some parameters to follow for what they could put in their local ordinances. And one of those parameters, if you will, was that the city or county could go ahead and impose a 1,000-foot buffer from, again, churches, schools, and child daycare centers. And the city could go ahead and impose a less restriction of a buffer requirement. But again, they can't still, because of buffer requirements, overall strictly prohibited facilities in their city limits. So I think the main things, the key things that we need to decide upon is when we envision having medical marijuana facilities in the Brentwood limits, where do we kind of envision those to be? So therefore, what zoning districts do we have that we would either see these permitted by right or possibly through a conditional use process? And then a second objective would be, do we want to apply these buffer requirements? And if so, to what distance? And also then what became more interesting to try to figure out would be how do we actually do these computations to come up with these buffer requirements. So our original ordinance that we had worked up with the land use attorney was to do a computation simply from the parcel line of wherever the medical marijuana facility would be to the parcel line to wherever the school, church, or child daycare center would be. That has been modified by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And what they had wanted the ordinance to address would be to go ahead and have a distance requirement, but to really kind of accept Missouri's state language on how you calculate that distance requirement. And so that was one change that was made since last Wednesday on the 31st when the commission had met. And along with that, I mean, they pretty well, the only other thing was that they discussed last Wednesday was the definition of a church. I know that was part of the Planning and Zoning Commission's discussion as to what really constitutes a church. As I mentioned, the other change since last Wednesday was incorporating the state's regulations method of calculating the distances. And the other change since last Wednesday was a point was brought up is if the facility could be shared by other users. And of concern would be possibly if you had a doctor who wanted to operate a medical office inside of the facility that would be writing prescriptions for medical marijuana. So there was a change with the ordinance now that you have before you, that there is a prohibition on shared use of such facilities. And then the last point of discussion from last Wednesday was we looked at amending the business license provision in the ordinances that is before you tonight. And more or less, we're just treating medical marijuana facilities as we would any other type of business here in Brentwood. So your dispensaries and your manufacturing would be treated as gross receipts business, but your cultivation centers and testing facilities, when there's not sale of items, would be like an exception business to determine the business license fee. So there were those 4 changes from last Wednesday. That's been incorporated in the last Friday in the ordinance that you see in front of you. Otherwise, I can be available for questions. So but that's all I have for the presentation point.
I want to ask everyone to hold their questions until we bring this up as new business. Anybody else in the public care to address the board during this public hearing time? Yes. Fitzgerald.
Patty Fitzgerald, read the court. I just have a question. Did I understand, I heard you say that you can't just say we don't want to do this because we don't want to, you have, it's any other business, you can't just say no, we don't want it.
That's
all I want to know.
That is
That's
correct.
right.
Since it's, and I can simply tell you, Ms. Fitzgerald, that question was asked by Alderman Leahy at the Planning and Zoning meeting, and our attorney said, since it's provided by the state constitution, if we passed a law that prohibits this, outlaws this, the result most likely would be that we'd find ourselves as a defendant in a lawsuit, and we would lose, and we run the risk of paying the attorney's fees. Thank you. Anybody else in the public care to address the board? All right, then we will close public hearing at 7:20. Next item on the agenda is Bill number 6251. Mr. City Attorney, first read only.
Mayor, ordinance amending certain provisions of Title IV, Chapter 400, Zoning Code, to establish medical marijuana land use within the city of Brentwood.
Okay, thank you. And just by way of lead-in, first of all, I want to thank Lisa. As she said, I don't think we appreciate how much work that went into to get this done. We asked her to move heaven and earth, and she did that and then some. I know she appreciates all this heaping of praise on her as well. But in all seriousness, the concern that I've had, and the reason I was asking that we, for this special meeting, is because of these deadlines that are popping up, August 3rd to August 17th, I thought it would be better if we had ordinances in place so that we can get out in front of this instead of having to respond to applicants. And this gives us the opportunity to set what we want the buffer zone to be, where, and what districts we want these entities to be located. And for those of you who are able to attend the planning and zoning meeting, I think you also will, you'll acknowledge that they spent a lot of time dealing with this. And for those of you who were not able to, or weren't able to review it on YouTube, I will simply sum it up by saying they focused in on a few items. One was, what districts do we want to have these dispensaries and other facilities in? The buffer zone between them, and then finally, how to calculate that buffer zone. And originally, the proposal was, as the crow flies, for lack of a better term, straight line distance. That was the buffer. The proposed, I think planning and zoning came out saying, recommending a 500-foot buffer zone. And so that would be 500 feet between the dispensary and either a church, a daycare, or a school. Then the question was how to calculate that. And again, originally it was a straight line measurement. The state of Missouri has a different way to calculate that. And the terminology, it's in the proposed bill, and it was, the distances described in this section shall be computed by measuring the shortest path between the demarcation points that can be lawfully traveled by foot, among other ways. A short version of that is, it's not a straight line necessarily. You're not, what the state is trying to do is make sure that people are crossing at crosswalks, legally permitted ways to get from one place to another. And that came out of planning and zoning with a unanimous positive recommendation. So that's what P and Z came out with. And they also suggested or recommended that it be located in PD district, light industrial, PD as a conditional use, light industrial as a permitted, and a permitted in the Manchester commercial district. So those are really the 3 or 4 things that P and Z was, Alderman Leahy.
If I may have a point of order.
Sir.
The paragraph or the sentence you just read is the sentence that is striked out.
Well, I'm getting there.
In the new version.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
Okay.
Both bills, Bill 6251 and the new revised one, both read the same in the way of your titling reading. I think we should clarify which version we're really talking to.
Yeah, and we're going to get there. We're going to get into,
Thank you.
Mr. Starr is going to chime in here in a second. I just wanted to give a little backdrop to where we are on this, and with that, Mr. Starr.
So what you have in front of you is a proposed amendment to the bill that's in front of you. And, pardon me, Mr. O'Keefe put this language together. It is more closely resembles the original recommendation by staff rather than the recommendation being made by planning and zoning. And the reason for that is if you look at page 4, the paragraph that was 3, the 3 is stricken through there. I guess becomes paragraph 2, where the distances described in the section shall be measured by straight line distance between the nearest point on the property boundary line of the property on which the medical marijuana facility is located and the nearest point on the boundary line of the property on which a school, daycare, or church or other medical marijuana facility is located. That is much more precise language than is contained in Amendment 2 that, and the regulations that were promulgated by the Department of Health and Human Services. So it's Kevin's recommendation that you use a more precise method of measuring so that there isn't guesswork as to, what is the nearest path that you can lawfully walk. That is really subject to a lot of vagary and could create disputes that are unnecessary. The rest of the language that is found there, the provided however language, is just an escape clause that says that if our method of measuring would increase the distance beyond that which is the minimum 1,000 square feet set by Amendment 2, then we would yield to the calculation in the amendment, so that there's no way that we can get sideways with the state law. The state law would trump us in that situation. But since we're going below 1,000 feet, it's unlikely that we're going to achieve a measurement like that. But it's possible, because you are measuring from the nearest point of a property line to another property line rather than building to building or doorway to doorway.
Okay, so let's first take up this proposed amendment by Attorney Keefe, literally right off the press.
Your Honor, I'll make the motion to amend Bill 6251 to the amended bill where it is redlined and stricken to reflect the changes suggested by the city attorney.
Okay, so we have a motion by Alderman Leahy to amend 6251 to reflect the changes suggested by our city attorney. Do we have a second on that?
Second.
We have a second by Alderwoman Sims. Okay, any discussion on this? Yes.
On anything, or just?
No, I'm sorry, on the amendment, on the motion to amend the proposed ordinance, yes.
We are looking at a clean. We're same as the red line. These are the same except for this one paragraph.
Yeah, I'm sorry, let me clarify. The materials that were circulated to you just tonight by BOLA, there's the red line copy on top, a clean line copy of the amended version, so it's the same as the red line. And then there are 3 other attachments, which are excerpts from your code that show that the straight line method is a method that you use elsewhere in the zoning code for differing uses or similar uses. So, for example, that first one deals with liquor, and then the next one deals with, if you go to the second page, there's some highlighted provisions there that talk about relevant facilities and how you measure. And then under 215.1330, 1360, there's measurements for various kinds of uses in your, looks like your commercial district, check cashing businesses, and pawn shops.
Okay. Does everybody understand the proposed amendment? Okay, any other discussion? No, then let's go ahead and, can we do a roll call on this, or do we just, is that fine, or?
Yeah, I think you should.
Okay, let's do a roll call, I'm sorry.
Is this on the amendment?
This is just to amend the proposed 6251 to reflect the red line.
Thank you.
On page 4.
Right.
Okay, roll call, please, Shelley.
Alderman Kramer's no longer with us. Alderman Leahy,
Yes.
Alderman Lockmiller,
Yes.
Alderwoman Parker Tice. Yes. Alderman Plufka,
Yes.
Alderwoman Sims,
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill,
Yes.
and Alderman Weggie.
Yes.
Okay, the amendment passes 7-0. Okay, now let's take up the rest of the bill 6251. Anybody, any questions? Alderman Plufka.
I actually have a question for Lisa. I appreciated very much your presentation. I just was curious as to, can you summarize what the thought process was with regard to planning and zoning on the issue of application by right within certain districts as opposed to by conditional use?
Yes. If I could, I'll tell you just initially what my perspective was on this was that we could go ahead and permit it by right in a certain zoning district, because there was other supplemental regulations that are built into this ordinance that says if your facility complies with all of these already, then it's complimentary. So they started the discussion about putting it in the Manchester Corridor Commercial District. Again, I think on the north side, of course, that abuts residential. But then on the south part of Manchester Corridor, you have a pretty large commercial area. So I think that's where, in their minds, they thought maybe the acceptance of it would be proper in the Manchester Corridor, although still, a bleak concern about the north side. But then I think, again, they were kind of still following what I had said about it permitted by right, because we have these other supplemental regulations. But then when we talked about plan development, which is a district where staff had proposed it to be permitted by right, then I think, again, it kind of came to their mind about we have plan development existing all along Brentwood Boulevard, and you've got residential areas that are in very close proximity to just the commercial frontage properties along Brentwood. So maybe it wouldn't be as appropriate, or at least should be vetted through a conditional use permit process.
Would it be true through the application process that it would be, that the Planning and Zoning Committee and this board would have greater control to exercise or greater influence to exert over applications that came to us on a conditional use as opposed to an application by right in either the Manchester Corridor or the planned development?
Certainly, I think you could make that remark across the board.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so your thought was the concern that was expressed, although it was voted 7-0? Did I read
The
that right?
vote last Wednesday was 9-0.
9-0, okay. To make it by right in these two areas.
To make it permitted by right in the Manchester Corridor for
Right.
dispensaries only.
Right.
Permitted by right in the light industrial for dispensary and the other 3 types of facilities.
By
And then
conditional use.
conditional use in the planned development for dispensaries only.
Right, and so really, my focus on this is that we do have, within the Manchester Corridor, we do have residential on that north side. And there's retail space, but there's residential in close proximity that isn't being dealt with regard to the buffer limitations, churches and daycares and things like that. And I just wonder out loud if changing the Manchester Corridor to an application for conditional use, that planning and zoning can bring those questions to bear with a little more leverage than they might otherwise be able to do if it was use by right.
I would say that's correct.
Okay.
The other thing that would come into play is if you would say that it should be by conditional use, then notices as well would go out to
I didn't think of
parties
that.
in
Sure.
proximity.
I understand. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are you making an amendment, a motion?
Not
to
yet,
amend?
just-
Okay. Alderman Lockmuller.
Could you speak to the separation of the dispensary from a physician writing prescriptions? Or if you have a strip mall with different bays, you could essentially have the dispensary and next door, a doctor's office writing prescriptions. The only separation is a wall in its own entrance, as opposed to having a physician sitting in the dispensary?
Correct. And we did discuss that. I'm not sure if there's a zoning answer to just having a doctor, having it occupy a unit right next to a facility, so.
But that's the only
It is
separation,
permitted
is
by-
the fact that there's a wall there and a separate entrance
Right.
for each of for the dispensary and the doctor. Okay, all right, thanks.
Any other questions? Alderman Leahy.
Lisa, did you get a chance to look at the question that I gave you earlier this evening? I'm looking for a clarification if state statute prohibits the use of a drive-through window through the dispensary or plants.
So I looked through it and I did not see that there was any mention of that. So I would say that there is no rule that the state has imposed that limits not being able to have a drive-through facility.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to make an amendment to this bill then. I'd like to take a look at the section where we discuss pages 3 and 4 on the medical marijuana arrangements, that we ask them to give floor plans and all of this, and no one under 18 and no alcohol. I'd like to amend this to include that a drive-through window would not be allowed with the facility.
So you're talking section 400.1960?
Yes, sir.
Okay, beginning on bottom half of page 3. So what's your,
Page 4, page 5, page 6, all deal with that section.
okay,
I would
so
like
it'd
to
be like a subsection P, because it goes down to O as I see it,
Yeah, okay, we can make it P.
or, I don't care what
That
order.
would prohibit the dispensing of the material through a drive-through window.
Mr. City Attorney, do you see any problem with that?
The statute does allow, or the amendment does allow for local control and that are reasonable zoning controls that you would have for other similar types of uses without putting an undue burden on a medical marijuana facility or business.
So the fact that I've got a paragraph in here that says it's similar to my pharmacies, and I do allow my pharmacies to have a window, I can't do this?
Not saying you can't, I'm saying it could potentially be an issue.
I'll withdraw the motion, Your Honor.
Okay.
That's,
Anything else? Alderman Leahy, you're done?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Alderman Plufka?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where to insert this.
Well, we can let Attorney Starr do that.
Okay.
Tell him what you
So
want.
I would be interested in making a motion to change from use by right to use under conditional use in the Manchester corridor. And specifically, it comes out of a concern for the folks that live immediately adjacent and some of them in that corridor. I just think that there should be that.
Okay, well, first, let's.
Okay.
So the motion is to amend the 6251 as already amended to change from permitted use to conditional use in the Manchester commercial.
The MC district, I guess.
MC district.
Correct.
So that's the motion by Alderman Plufka to amend that. We have a second.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to amend by Alderman Plufka and a second by Alderman Lockmuller. Okay, Alderman Plufka.
I just.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Just to be clear, so what we're talking about is section 2 of the ordinance, right?
Well, yeah, but it doesn't really say. It references it, but it doesn't.
So here's kind of a little bit of the confusing part, but we can figure this out. So when medical marijuana facilities were put in the MC district as a permitted use, it added 2 more sections to the ordinance, because remember in the Manchester Corridor Commercial District, we've established 3 classes based on the size of the parcel. So if you were going to allow it as a blanket provision in the MC district, we had to go back to each class, Class A, Class B, and Class C, to change it to permitted. If we go back and you just want to go ahead and revise it to be conditional use, then I believe there's only one place in the MC district where it has to be changed, because the classes are combined.
Okay. Well, we can do this on the fly, I'm assuming, right? I mean,
Yeah, your conditional uses, I think, are in section 5.
Yes.
Right.
I have a question for Lisa.
yeah, go ahead.
Did P and Z consider a conditional use permit for this instead of a permitted use in MC when they talked that through?
Each district was looked at for permitted or conditional, but I wouldn't say that there was much support for conditional. It seemed like the support was for the permitted.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion to amend to change from permitted to conditional? Alderman Leahy.
I'd ask Alderman Plufka, if the concern is to make it a conditional use because of the residential, where do you see a ability for planning and zoning or the Board of Aldermen to disallow an application because of its proximity to a residential? How does that work?
I don't know that it's disallowing by right or that it's automatic, but it requires them to gain approval of planning and zoning for the conditional use, and that's going to require site plan review, that's going to require conversations back and forth, and there's at least an opportunity for this issue to come up, whereas it wouldn't even be an issue.
They just
I mean,
come in and get a business license.
I take your meaning. It would also allow, as Lisa pointed out, it would also allow for the notices to go out.
Yeah.
I think, what it addresses is that it's going to be very site-specific. So if you had an application that had a drive-through attached to it, for example, and it wasn't at an intersection, you might have traffic conditions that you would deal with, those kinds of things that would be specific to a site. It wouldn't be an automatic basis for denial.
Anything else?
Thank you, sir.
All right, let's take a roll call, and what we're voting on right now is Alderman Plufka's motion to amend 6251 as previously amended to change from permitted use to conditional use the dispensaries in Manchester Commercial District. Okay, roll call.
Alderman Leahy?
Yes.
Alderman Lockmiller?
Yes.
Alderwoman Parker Tice?
Yes.
Alderman Plufka?
Yes.
Alderwoman Sims?
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill? Alderman Weggie?
Yes.
And Alderman Kramer is absent.
All right, the chair will now entertain a motion. Oh, I guess we need a second reading then. Do we? Yes, second read by title only, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The second reading of Bill 6251 as amended twice. An ordinance amending certain provisions of Title IV Land Use, Chapter 400 Zoning Code to establish medical marijuana land use within the city of Brentwood, Missouri.
Okay,
Your Honor, I'll make the motion to perfect amended Bill 6251 into ordinance form.
I'll second.
we have a motion by Alderman Leahy and second by Alderwoman O'Neill. Any further discussion? Okay, roll call, please.
Alderman Leahy?
Yes.
Alderman Lockmiller?
Yes.
Alderwoman Parker Tice?
Yes.
Alderman Plufka?
Yes.
Alderwoman Sims?
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill?
Yes.
Alderman Weggie?
Yes.
Alderman Kramer is absent.
Okay, passes 7-0, according to my count. Next item on the agenda, we do not have a closed session, after all, correct? Okay, so the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for showing up for the special meeting.
Is there anything